It may surprise someone who picks up a Bible, perhaps with not much background to understanding it, that the Bible is actually not written in the order that the books appear, particularly in the Old Testament. We're going to have a look now at why they occur, where they occur, and what makes them different. We've been focusing on the exilic literature, that is, the literature that arose during the exile of Judah into Babylon in particular. We've seen that the northern kingdom, known as Ephraim or Israel or even Samaria, was exiled by the Assyrians about 100 or so years prior to Judah being exiled by the Babylonians to Babylon. What arose during this period, known as the exilic period, which we're referring to as the Bible's exilic literature, is quite profound. And it's profound because we have a great portion of the Bible that is produced in this era, in this time. This is not to say that it didn't exist. It did exist, largely as oral tradition, and that oral tradition, such things as the book of Job, for example, were penned, written down in a completed form during the exilic period. We will also see, although we won't be focusing on it in this, is that the 5 books of Moses were compiled during this period as well. And so what we have now is another category of literature known as the wisdom literature, and that's what we're going to have a look at now. We've already looked at the prophetic literature, and we looked at Daniel and Ezekiel, and now we're going to have a look at wisdom literature. I need to define some terms. The first term is genre. Sounds very French. G-E-N-R-E, genre. It means a type of literature. So for example, we can have prose, which means just as you would write perhaps an account of something, or even a novel perhaps. We have poetry, and the way Hebrews wrote poetry is not the way we in our modern Western understanding of poetry now write poetry. So not necessarily rhyme, but certainly rhythm. And with rhythm comes what's known as parallelism. So Hebrews loved to have either a 2-line parallel Hebrew poetry, or even 4 lines, which gets a little bit more complicated, where you have A, then B, then A2, then B2. And so it can be sort of echoing each other in an offset sort of way. This is Hebrew poetry. And most English Bibles will show you by the way they indent the literature to show you that it is indeed poetry. So that's one of the genres. The other genres include history. History is told in a certain way, and for example, the ages of people are told in a certain type of historical way. And oftentimes those ages represent not necessarily the chronological age of a person when they die, but the age number that they're given. For example, Joseph, given the age that he is recorded as having lived to, is given in what we won't appreciate, but the original audience did appreciate, in an honorific way. And then we have prophetic literature, and as we will see when we get into the post-exilic literature, we will see this genre called apocalyptic literature. All right, so they're genres. They're genres of literature. We then have the Bible being divided in the sense of there are divisions, and these include law, history, poetry, prophetic. So what we have is wisdom literature largely occurring in the poetic division, and I'll show you that in a moment. The wisdom literature is kind of as it sounds. It's designed to promote wisdom, to promote a righteous way of thinking about God, His ways, His word, and His will. And this was critically important, as I'll show you in a moment. When we talk about wisdom literature, we're talking essentially about Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, or preferably Song of Songs, also known as Canticles. So these are the wisdom literature books. Interestingly, these books arose out of a deep concern for the next generation that was unfamiliar with either the land of Israel, the land of Judah, the temple, the sacrifices, the ceremonies. And now as the exile was coming to an end and they were free to return, there was a deep concern that young people would not necessarily return to the land of Israel and would probably gravitate to places like Alexandria in northern Egypt. And that would lead them to being exposed to polytheism, the idea of many gods. And so wisdom literature largely arose to be able to introduce to the next generation a type of literature that would introduce them to God, His ways, His will, and His word. And so wisdom literature presented to a younger person a way to live that would lead to a fruitful, enjoyable, honoured life. And so these are some of the themes that will run through wisdom literature. And so each of these wisdom literature books, and some would categorise some parts of Psalms into wisdom literature as well, is designed to encourage a young person whose ancestors were in covenant with God to renew the covenant themselves with God. So this is a very important motive behind the wisdom literature. So why is it presented in perhaps Proverbs or poetic verse? To make it easy to recall, to make it easy to remember, to bring to the memory of someone who is young. And as we look through the wisdom literature, we're going to see this idea of speaking to a young person about how and why they should form a covenant with Yahweh. That's what we're going to embark through as we look at the Exilic period's wisdom literature. I hope you can join with me as we do that.